Hey guys, Engineer Wannabe here, and we are going to be discussing a question I have seen discussed a few times in the forums and in Facebook groups and so on and so forth. We are going to be discussing or trying to discuss objectively whether one should maybe go for the affordable Grand Seiko or the expensive Seiko. Over here we have the SBGX263. And over here we have the SJE073J1. So before we get started, let's take a quick wristwatch check. I am wearing my Oris Big Crown pointer date in bronze on the Hirsch water-resistant leather strap. Considering it's summer, I find it pretty water-resistant. It doesn't stick to the skin like most leather would. And I do prefer it over the stock leather band. In the stock leather band, I'd see the bolt of the quick release spring bar. It would be visible here, and that really bugged me. So I was glad to get rid of that. Not really get rid of it, but to change out the strap. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started then. So. Here we have, like I mentioned earlier, the SBGX263. This is the silver champagne dial watch from Grand Seiko. It's in the entry level line with the 9F quartz movement. On this side we have the SJE073J1, also known as the Frosty or the Baby Grand Seiko, Baby Snowflake. It has a few nicknames. And this is got a very unique movement, not unique, but somewhat new. It's got the 6L35, which is very thin, and is decently decorated, kind of like a Grand Seiko movement would be decorated. So here we have basically high-end Seiko and a low-end Grand Seiko. Both of them retail for the exact same price. So let's go ahead and start the comparison by looking at the case. So let's start with the Seiko, the high-end Seiko, the SJE. We have a case that is high polished, high mirror finish polishing. Both of them are Zaratsu polished, as Seiko claims. And it is very, it's a black polish. The metal looks very reflective, and it's very prone to smudging. And it is very well done. It's very nicely executed here on this watch. We have very fine brushing on the top, and the insides of the lugs have been polished to give it a bit more character, as you can tell. The sides high polished, like I mentioned earlier, and the back is high polished as usual in most watches. So let's move on to the Grand Seiko, also Zaratsu polished, but as you can tell, even from here, even when you get closer, it's of a much higher luster. The finishing seems to be way more reflective, and it's not because it's newer or anything like that. It is out of the box. It looks like this, and so did this one here. So it's an apples to apples comparison. It's not this is a little older, but it's not like this has lost its luster, especially because this has a proprietary coating called Zaratsu. My apologies, proprietary coating called Dia Shield, which makes the steel a bit harder. It's a harder coating that goes on top of the steel, and it prevents scratches. Now that could be the reason why this has a higher luster, because Zaratsu, Dia Shield is known to give the steel a milkier finish, not as high of a luster. So that could be the reason why this one has a high luster, because this I don't believe has Dia Shield, because I am getting scratches on it way easier than I have on this one. But anyway. Let's go ahead with the case. We have very fine brushing, just like the SJE on the top. High polish on the sides, beautiful beveled polish on the edge. If you can see that, it's beautifully done. It's masterfully done, and it's all hand done, done by eye and by feel. Very very nicely done. Very high quality, and I would say it rivals the higher end Grand Seikos as well. But that's a topic for another time. Let me know if you would like me to compare this entry-level Grand Seiko to a higher-end Grand Seiko, compare the finishing, and so on. So that was the case. Let's move on to the bracelet, because that's attached to the case. We have very fine brushing on the top of the bracelet. We've got polished mid-links, or two polished mid-links. It's a 5-link bracelet, and the sides are high polished as well. We've got push pins over here, and overall a very very standard Seiko bracelet. Very high quality though. It has a much nicer drape than other Seiko bracelets that I've felt is very comfortable on the wrist. Very lightweight as well, and it's just overall very high quality on the high-end Seiko here. And on the Grand Seiko, as soon as you pick it up, you feel the quality of the bracelet. It is exceptional, absolutely incredible. The brushing is on another level. It's out of this world. It feels like silk, the brushing. You'd have to feel it to really get a grasp of it. And if you look at the sides here, the edges of the bracelet, it has a polished bevel, very beautiful, very perfectly done bevel. The sides are high polished, and it's a very simple bracelet. It does not have the complexity of this bracelet on the expensive Seiko, but much higher grade, much higher level of finishing on this watch over the SJE, the Seiko. And as you can tell, you've got screws here, not pins and collars, but real screws. So Advantage Grand Seiko there. Let's move on to the clasp. We have a fold-over clasp with a fairly long swing arm and a clasp that is flush with the bracelet. Very very high quality clasp here by the high-end Seiko. Now the Grand Seiko has a swing arm, a shorter swing arm, fold-over clasp with a shorter swing arm, and the bracelet, or the clasp, is not flush with the bracelet. And it has a very small gap. I haven't found it to catch on anything, so it's not too bad, but definitely not to the level of the high-end Seiko. So I'd say the advantage here goes to the high-end Seiko. Now we got the dial here. The dial is exceptional on the high-end Seiko. We have a beautifully frosted dial, very interesting, lots of character. It's something you just stare at. The applied logo is on stilts, so it looks like the logo is floating. Beautiful blued seconds hand. Everything is of exceptional quality on the high-end Seiko. The Grand Seiko, the affordable Grand Seiko, has beautiful Dauphine style hands, all steel. Again, the Grand Seiko logo is, don't believe it is on pegs or stilts. It's an applied Grand Seiko logo. Excuse me. And the dial is a silver champagne style brushed sunray dial. Beautiful fine brushing. It's very very nice, characteristic. It's just a gorgeous piece. The date is framed beautifully, and the same goes with the high-end Seiko. Beautiful work. But once more, we'd have to give the advantage to the high-end Seiko here. So let's go with the elephant in the room. This is a quartz movement on the Grand Seiko, and on the Seiko we have an automatic mechanical movement. So the movement on the Seiko is the 6L35. It is said supposedly once at one point was based on a Crador movement. So that's really interesting. It beats at 28,800 beats per hour. So it's a nice smooth tick, smooth sweep. On the Grand Seiko we have the 9F62. It's a quartz movement, but it's a very, very interesting quartz movement. We have it's beautifully finished, even though you can't see it. It is it's got thermal compensation. It's got a chamber that is airtight to keep dust out when you're changing the battery. So all the movement parts don't need a service for 50 years, I believe it's rated. And it's very very robust movement. It's got actually a dual stepper motors, so 2 stepper motors to be able to power those big and heavy steel hands. So I'll put up a super slow-mo video I took of the seconds hand. You'll notice that it ticks twice to reach its seconds mark, but it also has an anti-backlash mechanism so that the seconds hand does not judder or shudder as it moves from one second to the other. The 6L35 very nicely decorated. Nothing crazy, but of a much higher level than the usual 6R15 or the 6R27s or the 6R35. It's of a much higher standard. So as you can see, there's more to be said about the 9F62 movement here than there is to be told about the 6L35, but a lot of people are drawn to mechanical movements over quartz movements, although I found once I looked at this watch that it didn't matter to me as much. This watch was just something else. As soon as you see it, as soon as you feel the quality that oozes out of it. It's truly something. But with this watch, exceptional quality as well. But if I were to pick again, if I had to pick between these two, I love both these watches. They're very good watches. I would pick the Grand Seiko Quartz, even though I am a huge fan of automatic movements. The quality of the finishing and the movement, the interesting fact of how different this quartz movement is over the pedestrian quartz movements, and it's how over-engineered it is what I'm trying to portray. How over-engineered and how amazing this movement is. I would pick this one. It would be a very close call, but I would pick this one if I had to pick between the two. Like I mentioned earlier, the finishing on this Grand Seiko, which is the most affordable Grand Seiko you can buy new, is actually on par, very close to the highest end of Grand Seiko. Now this SJE, which is a high-end Seiko, though they both have Zaratsu polishing, it seems like Seiko took less time perfecting the polishing. Less time was put into the polishing and finishing of this watch, and you can really feel it when you hold the two watches. So if you were in this position, which would you pick? The high-end Seiko or the lower-end Grand Seiko? I think you'd have to answer the question about, the main question would be whether a mechanical movement is important to you. And even if it is important to you, I would suggest going and taking a look at this watch, holding it in your hands and feeling it out for yourself. You really have to hold it to understand how amazingly finished this watch is. Even though they're both Zaratsu polished, Zaratsu finished, this one has had way more care taken into it. And you'll find that when you look into the 9F quartz movements, that's no quartz movement to scoff at. it's something special. And you don't need to service it for 50 years, except for maybe taking care of the seals if you're going to go underwater with it. So I hope I helped you maybe decide between the two if you're in this position, if you're trying to decide whether you want a high-end Seiko or a affordable Grand Seiko. I am fortunate enough to have both, and I, if I could help it, I would not trade either of these watches. They're keepers in my collection. So this has been Engineer Wannabe. I hope I helped you, and I hope you guys have a good night. Take care.